Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome you to this morning's study. Before we begin, can you join me in a word of prayer? Dear Father in heaven, we are thankful for the time that we have to study once again this morning, and we invite your Spirit to be here as we open your word together. I pray that you can guide in how we discuss these things in Scripture as we continue to understand the unfolding of the lines in this time. And we just pray, Lord, that your Holy Spirit can reach deep into our hearts, bringing conviction and power. Help us to see our need of you and to depend upon you and upon the merits of thy Son, Jesus. And we ask, Lord, that he can be in our midst, that he promised that where two or three are gathered, that he would be here with us. And we pray for each other, for this movement, the people in it, and for those that are searching and studying for truth. Be with us now, we pray and ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, good morning again. Now, yesterday we had we started on a summary of Judges, and even though I sort of have a plan of what I want to do, I know it probably will be derailed to some degree. Now, so what is it we think that we need to figure out about Judges? What do we really have to do to close up this study, to finish the book of Judges? What are the loose ends that need to be sorted out? We know that Judges covers a certain period of time. We know we have a line of the judges, and we have these different judges, and we have lines for each of these judges. So what is it that we need to do to tie up all these loose ends? What are the loose ends that we need to tie up? I know we have some chronology things to sort out. So I'm asking you guys to help me here. For you personally, what is it that you need sorted out to put Judges all together? So everybody's pretty satisfied, or is there something that, okay, Ron?
As we have been going through this, we've established that there are multiple lines that we're going to have to look at within the book of Judges.
Mhm.
So I think the more difficult thing is going to be to establish what the main line is, and then look at all of the subsidiary lines and kind of place it so that we can get an idea as to what is, as you've been saying, a zoom in to certain portions and what constitutes a zoom out.
Okay. Yeah, so as we went through yesterday, we know that Judges chapter 2 is giving us this history from 2001 to 2023, with this eye forward to 2030. And we have quite well-defined lines. I mean, here we have the Judges line drawn there with the Samson and Delilah line below it. But we have these waymarks, these 7 waymarks, and then we have the 4th, right? So we don't just have, the 7, we have that extra way mark. Now, in Samson and Delilah, we know that this way, and that's maybe where we have this sort of weakness or something, because we have Samson as the 7th, and we have Samson and Delilah as a repeat of history. And that is, these first 7 waymarks give us the history from 9/11 to January 11th, 2023. Now, it will point forward to 2030. But Samson and Delilah is going to begin a line that's going to bring us to 2030, to the Day of Atonement, right? And ultimately, that line then is going to have the Sunday law at the end, right? So the 7 waymarks of these lines with the third angel arriving is going to be October 8th, 2030. That's the 10th day of the 7th month, marking symbolically the Sunday law. That is the close of probation on the line that Jeff has always drawn out, right? So the third angel arriving is a close of probation. And so there's some kind of Sunday law or close of probation marked there. Now, again, we're not saying that these are actual dates. I mean, they could be, but we have no idea, right? All we know is that they're structurally part of our lines and that we're pointed forward to them. And they do have symbolic application, right? That relates to our message. And so these dates, these spans of time that bring us to sometime in the future, we're not going to use them to predict anything. But we know that all of these lines are typical of something that's going to happen in the future. And that thing that is in the future is the Sunday law, right? So that's basically what we learned from Samson and Delilah, is that we start on December 25th, 2021. And we're really just dealing with this history since the end of the 777 structure, where we would say that the first 7, like the 7 judges, they address dates in that structure. We're going to have July 18th, we're going to have November 9th in those lines. But the line of Samson Delilah does not have any of those dates in their lines. It does have the last date, December 25th, 2021, but it doesn't have the other dates, right? So it's saying that that is a period of darkness, the 777 period. So we know it's a period of darkness relating to whatever these messages are that are given to us. So if you're saying that we need to define these lines, we've gone through these lines fairly carefully. I mean, we're going to go through them again, just as a summary to look at how these lines fit together with what we've done as we've gone through each of them. Now we can look at them again and say, yeah, that makes sense. So, I mean, it'd be nice to have these all drawn out nicely in order, and that's what I'm going to try to do in my notes that I'm going to do for the camp meeting. So what are the loose ends? So we have what Dwight said, is we need to get these all organized, and we do need to go through them again. Do we have questions or problems or things that we're not satisfied with regarding the lines of the judges, right? There's some of the chronological issues. I don't think all of us could draw out each of these lines individually from memory. We'd have a general understanding of what they're about. Now, Ron, did you have a thought on that? So Dwight, because I knew that your mic had turned on when Dwight started speaking. Are you there now?
Yeah, I'm here. Well, no, not really. I don't have any questions. There was nothing that we really left undone. Um, I think we need to go back over the stuff just to double check and triple check again. Just to make sure that everything that we've seen is coherent,
Yeah,
because I can't, no, you're right. I can't memorize this stuff, not yet. I mean, especially since this new Samson and Delilah line. There was a couple of things on there. I thought it was earlier that, but we kind of went over it. It seemed a little brash to be putting dates in there that we we kind of speculated on.
right. And we're just saying what should happen, right?
Right,
Right.
right.
But we don't know if that means anything.
Exactly. We don't know if it means anything.
Yeah, because it's future dates. We can't predict future events, but we can say, well, we're doing this, and these would be fulfillments of that. So I'm just looking at, I haven't organized these lines in my PowerPoint in any way. So I'm just seeing, I know that some of these lines are later. So Judges line, Samson, Delilah.
One of the issues that we're going to face
Yeah.
in being able to present what we have seen so far in Judges is to be able to have it be a bit more cogent for those that have not been studying with us, because we don't need to repeat the issue that happened with July 18th. Now, I'm not being detrimental regarding July 18th. I believe that this was something that needed to be done because people needed to be awakened to the fact that this is going to happen.
Okay, so the issue, what do you mean by the issue with July 18th? We don't want to repeat that.
Well, we began studying as a group after July 18th to really understand why we would believe that July 18th was such an important waymark.
Yeah.
Now, we're doing roughly the same thing with this in the book of Judges.
Mm-hmm.
Yet, this has not yet become as fully ingrained, and I'm speaking for myself, not for the group, but for myself, as say October 22nd, 1844, or what we've studied in the past about the time of the Millerites.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as we're dealing with this in the book of Judges, do we have a kind of a grounding or an anchor that can show that what we're looking at with this in the book of Judges is a repeat of where we were in Millerite timeframes?
Okay, so because we know when we're using these waymarks, we're using Millerite history as the template, right?
Correct.
And
That's the thought.
yeah, so we should know Millerite history, right? We should understand the basic line, darkness, the time of the end, the increase of knowledge, the formalization, empowerments, and so we're using this pattern to analyze the book of Judges and each of the judges, right?
Exactly.
Now,
Which it seemed to work out for us fairly well.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Now we know that within the movement that the lines had been obscured. And the big one for me was the priests, Levites, and Nethinim, to get rid of that thinking. Nothing wrong with the idea that there are priests, Levites, and Nethinim. But to understand these separate lines, we now know that that's not how we would create the lines. They do sort of overlap, because we saw that with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But they overlap because there is an overarching line with waymarks that we can zoom into to create new lines. So that idea is really what a fractal would be like. The priests, Levites, Nethinims, in the way that Parminder presented them, would not be a fractal, right? And doesn't represent anything that we see in Millerite history.
Yeah, there was no way that they even could be a fractal.
Yeah, so just they weren't. And since Millerite history didn't look like that, it didn't make sense to draw our lines out like that. Where when we do the lines this way, we can clearly see not just how Millerite history is connected with our history, but we can see how each line that we have, that these also exist in Millerite history. That is, we have, a line that addresses Miller, the arrival of the first message. We have a line of Samuel Snow. That's actually Samuel Snow's letters, right? And we probably even could draw out those lines in more detail. We haven't spent the time as much trying to figure out these different lines, but each of these waymarks, there would be a line of the formalization of the message. There would be a line of the empowerment of the message. And probably that line of the empowerment of the message, would be something that actually connects to our history, right? To 9/11. And, a line of the arrival of the second message, the line that addresses midnight itself. And so when we have the line of the judges, we have it drawn out in a particular way, and we say that it represents Millerite history. It's based on Millerite history, but it's specifically, we're making an application to our time. That is, it gives us details about our movement from 9/11 to 2023. And that's because God's dealings with men are ever the same. And we would expect that God's going to have lines within our movement, and we hadn't understood, we would talk about something being midnight or midnight cry, and yet we would have different midnights and different midnight cries, and we didn't know what midnight we were at or what line we were in. So I think that has to be made clear in some simple way, right? That we can show that. And I'm not sure if I know how to show it as simply as it needs to be shown. Part of the problem when you're dealing with presenting something to someone, like groups of people, especially people you're not interacting with directly, is you don't know when you've lost them. You don't know when you've left out a piece of information that you assume that they would know, and that piece of information is extremely important for them to move forward, right? So if you're not getting interaction, then it's really hard to know. Did you do a good presentation or not? It's much easier to just deal with the person one-on-one and answer their questions and fill in the pieces that they need. But when you're dealing with a larger group of people, it's hard to make it cogent. I mean, you don't know if you've covered all of your bases, and that they can follow it. And we've spent a lot of time studying it, and it's a lot of information. So, in some ways, we could just, skim over some of this and then just focus upon, the story of Samson even, right? As an example of of what's done and what's coming. But so yeah, that's going to be part of the problem. So Ron, does that sort of respond to what you said, Dwight?
Yes, somewhat. I just had a thought. So when we were first getting involved with Six Sigma in one of my jobs, we were given presentations inside of there. And then what we would do at the before we even started the presentation is we'd hand out paper and pencil and ask them as we were going through their presentations to jot down any questions that they had.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if they didn't, even if they didn't feel like they wanted to express them outright, please write it down. We wanted to get your input on this. And then we would take those survey cards and then we would see where we were lagging and then incorporate answers to those questions in our next presentation, because we would do these things in groups.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just something that came to my mind as you were sitting there talking about it.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things I've asked people to do is have a question and you're watching a YouTube video,
yeah, put it on the line.
Write the question there. So I've got very few questions though, so.
Yeah, I've noticed.
And, and I'd like to have a lot more discussion on the YouTube videos themselves. Just to me, it would help me a lot. So, I mean, Zoom is difficult because you don't get a lot of feedback. I mean, obviously once in a while I have you or somebody else, be interacting with me a little bit. Sometimes we get a few people. But that's sometimes, we don't get much interaction at all. And I know where my mind is, but I'm always trying to think about what other people are seeing, what it is that they might not notice, and try to draw their attention to these little details. And so it seems like a rather slow process, plus also I'm learning as we're going along here. We're discovering things. Just to me, it almost seems miraculously discovering things.
It's not like we have this stuff down or anything. I mean,
Yeah.
we're beginning to learn this stuff now.
Yeah. I mean, if we put out some dates there and all of a sudden we find all these numerical connections and symbols that exist in the verses that we're studying, that to me is kind of a miracle. That's God's guidance. Now, part of it is we're uncovering something that exists. So, we're not creating these things. We're more like, maybe archaeologists isn't the best way of looking at it, but we're digging up something and these artifacts and they come to light and we see them and we're amazed at them. But it's not like we made them.
Well, we see them and then we speculate about them. I mean,
yeah,
which can be dangerous.
Yeah, well, I'm not a speculator, right? I'm not somebody who likes guessing, right? And I said to Jeff, this was a long time ago, that I wasn't good at I can't remember the word I used, but he's used it a number of times, that I'm not good at drawing out the lines, or not good at figuring out the symbols or whatever. It's not that I can't do it. It's just that I don't like guessing at something, right? So I'm not going to interpret a symbol without lots of good reasons to do so. But, we sometimes have to put things on a line. We have to try things out. It's just amazing how often things work out. Now, I'm sure there are some things that we got wrong. There's some things we just didn't notice something. That if we did, we might change, one of the waymarks to some other date or something. But it seems like these are fairly solid, right? Now, when we go back to, the first judges, Othniel, Ehud, and Shamgar, we know that Shamgar is existing at the time of Ehud. At least that's what it appears, right? But yet, we're going to have this first line here. And this is going to be, what's this thing doing here? There we go. There must be something there blocking it. Anyway, this is going to be a zoom into a waymark on the judges, which is, of course, 9/11. And we say that this is 9/11 related to a zoom into the second angel's message. So 9/11, the history of the judges, as we apply it, when we apply it to 9/11, we're not zooming into the empowerment of the first angel. We're zooming into the arrival of the second, which is really about the Sunday law. But it's 9/11, which is a waymark in a line that Jeff has created, God, Jeff. But we're going to have this waymark, and this waymark, Jeff would go 9/11, midnight cry, Sunday law. But really that whole line is a zoom into the Sunday law waymark itself, right? Where the way that Jeff had understood it is sort of that the Sunday law was a part of his line. But actually it's just a zoom into that line. It is a part of the line. So when we're taking the history of the judges, we're zooming into 9/11. But 9/11, of course, is going to lead us to the Sunday law. So just as we did with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then Joseph, and to me, that's sort of the primary model to understand how we can zoom into these lines. It was clear there in Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph that we would have this 3-1 combination, that each of them had their own lines, but they're also part of a bigger line. And that
Perhaps that's your shoe in the door, per se.
Yeah,
The
that
Abraham,
really helped
Isaac
us.
study.
Yeah. So without that, we wouldn't have been able to proceed in the way that we did as we went through the book of Joshua, and then finally when we got to Judges. We just wouldn't have been able to see the things that we saw. We wouldn't have had the tools to work on the book of Judges the way we did.
So,
Yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but there was you were talking about yesterday how we got it. Would you please? How we got into where we started to study in Judges. And as I was going back through the study, I noticed that just prior to the end of 24, Joshua, that we were exploring, I can't remember. Well, it was something that Sister White, it was a certain chapter, and it was discussing the very lines that we were talking about. And I haven't really investigated it further, but it looks like it was because we were in that study with Ellen that we went where we did in Judges. That's what it's looking like.
Yeah.
Through my investigation yesterday.
Yeah. And so this is an interesting point you bring up. Now, I'm not sure if I totally understand what it was you were seeing at the time. But when we were dealing with Judges, we were dealing with the covenant, right? And
yes,
this covenant renewed here in Joshua chapter 24. And this is,
I'm
of
sorry,
course,
what?
This is the covenant renewed in Joshua chapter 24.
Right.
Right. And this is going to go all the way back to Abraham, right? Right. If you read here, and Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem and called for the elders of Israel and for their heads and for their judges and for their officers, and they presented themselves before God. Now, why are they at Shechem? Why does he gather them at Shechem?
I'm sorry, I don't remember.
Okay. Well, where's Shechem? What is Shechem? It shows up again and again.
Because of Mounts Ebal and Gerizim, the
Right,
mounts of cursing and blessing.
right. So we got the blessings and the curses, the 25-20, right? First seen
Right.
in Leviticus 26, repeated again in Deuteronomy 28, right? That is before Moses dies. He's going to talk about the whole history that they've been through and what they're going to do once they get into the promised land. They're going to go to Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim, and they're going to, he tells them how to organize and go up there on the mountains and make this covenant with God, these blessings and curses. This is this confirmation of the covenant, so to speak, right? And then we're going to see this repeated, right? So they're going to do it. And then we're going to see this repeated here at the end. He's going to go to the same place and renew this covenant. And so this deals with the 25-20, right? The blessings and curses. This is a, you know, in a sense, a repeat of history, right? He's going to go over the history. Isn't that what this movement has been doing? I mean, really from the beginning.
Yep.
You know, and we've been examining the foundation. We go back to the beginning. We see, you know, here's the problem I have with the Adventist Church. They have a quarterly called Three Cosmic Messages, and they don't address the history of the beginning of the Adventist movement. They don't address the location of these messages, right? They don't address, you know, Millerite history. What is the first message? When was it given? What are the dates? They don't address the second angel's message. They don't address Samuel Snow and the midnight cry, right?
Which are all very important,
Well, you can't have a third without a first and second, but
right?
if you don't have the location of those messages, if you don't know when they were given, if you don't understand those messages, you can be professing to give the three angels messages, but have no idea what they are. And that's the problem with Adventism. It does not understand its history. Now,
Are you sure it doesn't understand its history, or it's just decided to reject its history?
well, I think there's a bit of both, but I would say that the average Adventist has no idea. I mean, before I came into this movement, I'm a Bible student. I'm studying. I'm reading Spirit of Prophecy. But I had never studied Millerite history, because the impression that I always had is that the Millerites were full of error. And, you know, I mean, they happened to get the right date, you know, for the end of the prophetic periods. Well, really just the end of the 2,300 days. The 70 weeks, they never even got correct, you know. So I just didn't see the point in going back there. But I just didn't know. I mean, I would think ignorance is the biggest thing. The church took steps. And when you get to the fourth generation, they've forgotten the first generation. And even in 1905, Ellen White is talking about, you know, the pioneers, that the people that are alive now weren't there. She even says that earlier, right? And we need to have that experience. We need to go back and understand that history. So that's what this movement was founded on. Now we see counterfeits around, you know, people who claiming to go back to the understanding of the pioneers, but they don't understand anything about Millerite history. They get lots of things wrong. they make all kinds of wild assertions that can easily be disproven as incorrect. And then they want to do things like keep Miller's chronology, saying, well, since it was, endorsed by Ellen White, because in Samuel Snow, he's going to keep Miller's chronology when he deals with the 6,000 years and the 2520. And so, people say, well, we need to keep, Miller's chronology. But Ellen White contradicts Miller's chronology. She contradicts many of the things that are in Snow's presentation of the true midnight cry, because he was wrong about many things. So, and they'll do this with Uriah Smith. Since Ellen White endorsed something, they can ignore everything that she has said on that topic, right?
Yeah,
Because she
Pretty much.
endorsed something that somebody has said. And now if she says something different, well, her endorsement of that person's writings override anything else that she says, which is ridiculous, right? So obviously she's not giving a full,
it's not well thought out.
that's not a full-blown endorsement of everything that Samuel Snow says down to the detail, right?
She never actually made that claim. I mean, I've studied her enough to know that she's careful with her wording,
Yeah.
not to offend and not to excite. So you have to take it as everything that she does say. You need to see what she says in order to figure out if that's actually what she's saying, because a lot of people get things so confused.
Yeah.
They read one thing and it's like, oh, well, that's, that's the mantra now,
Yeah. No, you have to take everything. Now, the other thing is, looking here at Joshua 24, right? So he's going to go back to Abraham. I took your father Abraham. Well, this is obviously, God speaking through Joshua, right? Thus, I took your father Abraham from the other side of the flood, that is the Jordan, and led him throughout all the land of Canaan, and multiplied his seed and gave him Isaac. And I gave unto Isaac Jacob and Esau, and I gave unto Esau Mount Seir to possess it, but Jacob and his children went down into Egypt. And I sent Moses also and Aaron, and I plagued Egypt. So he's going to go through this whole history that we had studied as we went through these lines. And so he's laying out a line, is he not?
That's what it appears to me.
And this line that he's laying out is he's laying this out when he's renewing this covenant, right? So this covenant that was made is prophesied in a sense by Abraham. I mean, God obviously is speaking to Abraham, but we see this in Abraham's life, this covenant being worked out, and it's a prophecy about what's going to happen to the Israelites. And it's going to happen in this chiastic structure, right? The two periods of 215 years over 430 years. And so Joshua is going to reiterate this history, and he's going to do this in the context of renewing this covenant between Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim, cursings and the blessings. So this is about our movement. We know that our movement, that what God wants to do is go into covenant with this movement, because he's given us all of this light, right? He's brought us through the experience of the Millerites. So in the end, we then are to go into covenant with God. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so what the book of Judges is going to be, is it's going to be the history of this movement, specifically since 9/11, up to 2023. And so what we know is that God is seeking to be in covenant with this movement. I mean, God wouldn't be giving us all of this light just so a few of us can make some videos and talk amongst ourselves, right? I
It's
mean,
got a higher purpose.
to me, this is a lot bigger than us as individuals. We're just some little Bible study group, right? I mean, there are times, you can have Bible study groups and God can teach you things and it helps you individually. Because he wants us to be Christians and we need to study the Bible, and Bible study groups are good things. But this is something that addresses Adventism, right? This is light that everyone needs to have. So this is what God has been doing. Psalm 19, verse 4, Angela. I know you bring that one up once in a while.
Yeah, Psalm 19 is for us. I really believe that. Psalm 19:4, as you guys were talking, came to me. It says, "Their line is gone out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them hath he set a tabernacle for the sun."
Right.
Beautiful promise, and I know he's going to expand this message as we grow, as we expand.
Yeah. Now, when we look at this, we know this goes back to Adventism. So God gave, this message to Miller, and that message, then to Snow, and then we had, James and Ellen White, and we had this small group of people, basically a small study group that would meet in a house. Ellen White, I guess she says there's about 50 people that basically came out on the right side of the issue after the Great Disappointment. Not sure at what point, she's marking that 50 souls, but you have a small group of people that come out of, a movement that has millions. Well, maybe not millions, but lots and lots of people, whatever it is, whatever that number is.
Thousands of thousands.
Yeah. So 500,000 at one point, down to 50,000, and then to 50. Sort of the number that I like because it's nice, simple. But that movement is going to become the Adventist church, but the Adventist church ends up rejecting its foundation. So now you have this, the 1919 Bible Conference. You're at the end of the second generation, and it's going to have the books of a new order. It's going to enter into a new organization, something that Ellen White says that we should not do. Now, a lot of people use her quote and saying, you shouldn't start some new church, but it's already been done, right? The books of a new order and this new organization have already been created.
Yes.
Now,
The rot has come from within mostly, and people, they need to look through the art of war. I've looked at it, and it's stealth warfare. And how much better to wage war when it's undercover and it's infiltration and it's undermining the foundations.
Yeah. And then we look at Adventism. So, God, led me to Adventism, through studying the Bible and through hearing about things. I'd kept the Sabbath and I understood the state of the dead before I entered an Adventist church. But, and I challenged everything that Adventism had to say. I mean, so I wasn't one of those guys who went to an evangelistic series and just accepted a bunch of stuff. I studied. When I first got baptized, I spent a lot of time in the public library in Edmonton, researching, reading encyclopedias and old books and trying to uncover the facts. Was Adventism based on some kind of reality, or was it just some kind of a cult? I wanted to know, right? Read Kingdom of the Cults, first book I read after I got baptized. And so I started to piece together the history of the Adventist church to some degree, right? There's still a lot more that I had to learn. But the thing about Adventism is there seemed to be this disconnect from what the spirit of prophecy teaches and what the church is doing. And a lot of new converts figure that out, right? Some just end up leaving when they find that out because, well, they're not practicing what they preach, so to speak. So why am I in this church? Some just sort of settle down into the social environment of Adventism. Though when you become an Adventist, it's hard to actually enter into that sort of clique of Adventism. Somebody who's born into Adventism, a generational Adventist, has a different status in the church than somebody who just becomes a convert. The proselyte.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Yeah. Well, I noticed that for the first time when I got married to Heidi, because she's, related to half of the people in College Heights. And that changed my status right away, at least for a time. Yeah, so she's a fourth generation Adventist. So, but well connected in that sense. But the point is, we have all these different types of Adventists. And, and I've been very blessed in that, the church that I ended up spending most of my time in the last 35 years has been Warburg Church, which I don't know if I could have survived in these bigger churches in the city. I definitely don't think I could have. I would have been just too marginalized for me to even grow within that church. But Warburg Church provided an environment where I could, as a young man, learn how to do sermons, teach Sabbath school, and learn to work and cooperate with others who are following God. We didn't have a lot of unconverted people. You always have some, but Warburg was quite different. It's slowly changing, but and to some degree, the church was largely, my influence was huge in shaping the church to be what it became. So we had a lot of old people. There wasn't many young people at all. And so, we sort of set the tone of what we studied and how the church functioned and operated. People have come in that are trying to change it now, but, the point is, Adventism is not something I'm very interested in, right? I'm not interested in the organized church. I really have no place in it. But the truths of Adventism, the spirit of prophecy, that's powerful stuff. So how do you get, Adventists to actually even look at anything, right? They have all of these walls and barriers built up. And so we believe that this movement is raised up to break down those walls and barriers, right?
Amen. It's the calling of Jeremiah where he was told he was going to tear down and then rebuild.
Yeah. The thing about it is the stuff that we've been studying. If we could have presented this to Adventists 50 years ago, I guarantee you there would be many, many of those people interested and convicted by what we have found in God's word. Obviously, it'd be impossible to do that, right? But you understand what I'm saying? That this would be things that would be much more readily received in the past than they are in the present. And that's because the church has so far departed from Adventism that it's hard to recognize it as Adventism. It has the shell of Adventism, but none of the interior, none of the substance. And in some ways, I was sheltered from that being in Warburg Church. When I would visit other churches, it would be quite surprising to me at how little that people knew about the Bible and how superficial the worship services were and how sentimental. For many Adventists, if they go to church and they get some laughs and they get a few tears, they feel that that's a religious experience, right? They need to be entertained, and they need to have some story where they can cry a few tears so that they can feel that they somehow are spiritual, correct?
That's like every church,
Right.
not just Adventist church, but
No,
every
but
church.
Adventism are that way. But it never used to be that way. You know, it wasn't a church of sentimentalism. It was a church of,
The first Adventist church I ever went into is what attracted me to Adventism, because people actually interacted
Mhm,
at, like during the studies and even the sermons, they interacted.
mhm.
And that's how I've always seen a church to be, is an interactive church experience, not necessarily, sitting in front of the TV and watching this all stuff happen.
Yeah. No, and that's why I became an Adventist, went to church and, argument broke out. So this is a great church to go to see a Sabbath school where there's a debate and people are still friends, right? So Adventism,
Yeah, it was an argument. It wasn't a it wasn't a knockdown drag out.
yeah, yeah. But a good intellectual, solid argument that was devoid of emotion, right? A debate, an intellectual debate. To
That's
see
what it
that in
should
a
be.
church, to see that in a church, that was the first time I ever seen it, was in an Adventist church. That's the reason I got baptized. I was already keeping the Sabbath and, as I said, believed in the state of the dead. But if I had seen just what I'd seen in other churches, I probably wouldn't have got baptized. So, I might have maybe attended for a while and, watched what was happening. But we saw right away, as soon as we went there the first time, well, we want to get baptized.
Don't we call those two things that you just mentioned the two walls that we're always up against? Is the
Sabbath, state of the dead.
they understand the Sabbath and the state of the dead. Those, to me, actually, that's what's always been the thing that uh, 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 was abrasive to me. It people's ideas of when the Sabbath was, first of all,
Yeah.
and then people's idea of them going immediately to heaven.
Yeah. So these attack the two great errors, Sunday sacredness and the immortality of the soul. Right.
Yeah, I was fighting. I mean, that's kind of the first things that just popped in my mind as to what I was seeing wrong in the church that I was attending, which was a Baptist church.
Yeah. So the question that we have, because we're thinking about, okay, we need to get this message to Adventists, right? Now, we know that we have to go back to the history. So one of the things in my study of this movement, I mean, the thing that I saw that would be the anchor, or that could tie us to the past, so that Adventists would look at what we're saying, would be the start of the 2300 days, right? To show that history in the story of Ezra, to show the history of the three decrees, and as well as the story of Joseph, the structural chiasm there. There's things that when I show them to Adventists, they can't help but see, right? They shine out really clear. Now, when it comes to this movement, if we're going to try to translate that into this movement and what we are studying, what is it that we would have to show people in this movement that they would see right away? Doesn't mean they're going to act on it, but at least they would be convicted that what we're doing is correct, right? So this is the struggle. Like, I think about, my conversation with Colin back on the 25th of February, right? So I went there on Sabbath afternoon and talked to him. And, so I try to think, well, what is it that I can show him that he'll say, ah, you know, we need to look into that. And so for people in this movement, there's lots going on. And you know, and we see what, you know, Brother Daniel's doing in his study. He's going through good old solid conservative Adventism. Nothing wrong with that. And that can be our safety to some degree. But we know we have to figure out, you know, how do we move on in this movement? Because we can't just build up a fortress, right? This movement is meant to act. It's meant to accomplish a task. And
What does Angela mean?
children in the marketplace.
What does that
That's
mean?
just about, you know, I piped in, but you did not
Because you
dance.
guys were talking about the main line, you know, like where Christ said, you're like children in the marketplace. We've piped onto you, you've not danced, and so forth.
Okay.
And then I was thinking of what Paul said too about the veil having to be removed from people's hearts. And he was talking about the Jews, of course, but the veil needs to be removed from all our hearts. And if we're not willing to at least investigate these teachings, we're going to be lost. We're going to keep retrograding and build up more resistance to light, and we'll be lost. This is what terrifies me.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, you know, right now Heidi and I are reading Fifth Testimonies. That's my favorite book of the testimonies because it's the biggest one. It's not the only reason. It's written at a good time. Just, you know, after James White has passed away. And Ellen White's writing there is really profound in Fifth Testimonies. But, you know, she's talking about how the churches are unconverted, that the people are unconverted, the parents are unconverted, the teacher, you know, like all through the church, it's basically, I mean, we wouldn't see that if we looked at it from the outside. We would just see a bunch of conservative Adventists. That's what we would perceive, you know, if we went to a church. But really, the corruption that's in those churches are just as bad as the corruption that exists today. It's just, you know, hidden under, you know, hidden more than it is. People are not ashamed to reveal their sins, right? They're almost proud of it, right? That they can stand in rebellion against God. But people used to hide those things much more. But you think about it, Ellen White was laboring for people as a prophet in the church for years. And that church went into the wilderness, right? So the struggle that we have, we talk about this veil that's upon the heart. I mean, we know that this has to do with us, right? The God is giving us this light. And that's sort of, I mean, it's a little bit, seems almost irrational to suggest that somehow God is giving this light to us at this time in Earth's history, to, you know, to us particularly, who have no position, no power, no authority. You know, how is he going to work out his will through what he has shown us? I mean, that to me is this huge hurdle. But somehow this movement, right, has to be able to be converted, right? And that's not talking about like other people. Like, I mean, obviously other people need to be converted, but we have to figure this out for ourselves first. And then we have to be able to show this light that God has given us to this movement. But yet there are these barriers, right? These barriers of hurt feelings and personalities and preconceived ideas. I mean, one of the things I know about people is that people are damaged, right? All of us are damaged. And
Yep.
And often what we are doing in our interactions with others is because we're hurt, we have these perceptions about others, and we do things to hurt. So our interactions with others aren't necessarily very healthy, right? So we have all of this emotional stuff going on. When somebody says something or does something, it affects us emotionally in a negative sense, right? So we have attitudes about people's characters, and they say something, it hurt our feelings, or they're this or there's that, and we can judge people based upon that. So we can look at the other study groups, and we can say, well, I don't like this person, I don't like that person, and they don't like me, and we can have opinions about them, but the question is, what are we going to do to help them? What are we going to do to lift that person higher? And that can be a very difficult thing, especially when you don't have relationships with them, right? I mean, a lot of these people I don't really even know. I mean, there's a couple of people I know, but even the ones that I sort of know, I don't really know. I've never interacted with them other than in meetings or Bible studies, for the most part. And so I don't even know what that person's going through. So all that God has given us is he's given us a message, right? So God hasn't given us a psychological message or some kind of self-help message. He's given us the gospel, right? And anytime we try to, we need to have sympathy with people. We need to understand how people work. But we are told that basically it's the truth that is the light that shines into the darkness. So Christ's character has to be reproduced in his people. His character needs to be seen in us. And so even though I think about how I have to organize these studies, I know that there is something that I can't do. I can't make decisions for people. I can pray for them. I can present the truth as I understand it, in the simplest and most powerful way.
So, do you recall the story of how the chart was developed?
You're talking about the 1843 chart?
Correct.
Okay, what part of the story?
Well, the whole story that how these two guys, they were working on this stuff, and then they painted this sheet with figures on it to express that, and then somebody's seeing that, and then the next thing you know, they're putting this on paper and giving it to 300 guys.
Okay, well, I don't know if that's the story that I know.
Who came up with the story? Who came up with the art?
It's
Wasn't it Fitch?
yeah. So they had made another chart just a bit earlier,
Right.
and then that first chart is the one that you see with the 2520, the 2300 days, and the 1335.
Right.
Right. So that chart was made, and then basically they decided to make a better chart. Right. So the history I know of the chart is in a book called Protestants in Pictures, Religion, Visual Culture, and the Age of American Mass Production.
So my
Written by an
point
Adventist, and he goes through.
it was a development over time.
Yeah, a very short period of time.
Exactly.
Within a
So
year.
we're
Yeah.
gonna have to put it out there, however it shows up, and then wait for corrections to come up, because there's going to be people that are going to go, oh, well, what I would have done was, you got to have that interaction, all that pre-presentation stuff. And so to get back onto your question, Um, so one of the ways that we could show, in my mind anyway, I can see this in my mind. I can't, but I might not be able to do this as well as you per se.
Mhm.
So we get the, you know how we keep saying this is a zoom into.
Yeah,
So I think we should be able to show at least 3 or 4 examples of that, of how this line now we can take a line and go from this particular event on this particular line and now come down here and now make 7 more things on this particular subject that's in perfect relationship to that waymark, that zoom in.
Mhm.
And we've got it. I mean, I've got all those charts that has been posted by Aaron. You know, they're yours, they're Dwight's, they're
So the way that I was going to do the paper that I'm working on is I'm first going to address um, just the basic over the structure of the lines of Millerite history in our line, and Jeff's line, whatever you want to call it, Ellen White's line and Jeff's line, and then
right.
I'll go through
We
Abraham.
call that the main line, right? Or
Yeah.
the big line,
Yeah, that's Ellen White's line is the big line,
right?
and then ours is a zoom into the Sunday law. And
Yeah, and we could define
that.
that nomenclature as well.
Yeah. So then I would show that, and I would illustrate that with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph.
Right.
Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob being the first, second, and third angel's message, and Joseph being the fourth, right?
Right.
And then show that I can zoom into each of them, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I can have a separate line for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that the story of Joseph has his own personal line in a sense, but there's also this bigger line. And then we know in the story of Joseph, so maybe this is too complicated, but in the story of Joseph, we can take that and we can connect that to the 2520 for Northern Israel. We can also connect it to the reform line of the decrees. And that connects, of course, to Millerite history and then into our history. So even these histories in the past, they're all part of a structure, right? So
Right.
trying to do that in the simplest way possible without too much.
I keep seeing a tree.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, you could have, a tree of all of the lines, where you zoom in and then you can see, you zoom into a waymark and then you see the tree underneath it and you zoom into.
Okay, so you're seeing what I'm seeing.
Yeah, but I don't know how to do that visually, simply. It'd be nice to have sort of, how when you have the fractal programs and you can just keep zooming in.
Right.
Nice if you could just have a program like that. It'll show the big line and you zoom in and it just, all these details pop out. You zoom in different places, you just keep seeing the same pattern. But, that would take a lot of technology. But the point that we have here, the point that I'm trying to make, and this is just a picture of that chart that was Himes, Joshua V. Himes made this chart. So Himes made this chart originally and then
Right.
commissioned to do the 1843 chart. But it's interesting how much these lines are like our lines.
Right.
Not, I mean, in a sense, you could say we've copied them, but they're chronological lines with these.
Well, haven't we copied them? Because I keep looking at this stuff as the foundational understanding. This is the Millerite understanding. And then all we've done is zoomed in on this stuff and made more understanding from it.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And now this book here that this is in, this is this book, Protestants and Pictures. So it goes through the history of lots of different art in America, but it's written by
I've got that chart. I've
Yeah.
had that chart
So-
for years.
So he's going to go through in this book. So he's going to go through the Adventist things where they got these pictures from. So that they had these.
Oh, he's
pictures.
quite detailed.
Yeah, and this is the book where I found that they actually made 500 of the 1850 chart, not just the 1843 chart.
I'm sorry, can I have it?
Yeah, I can send it to you.
Could you broadcast that, or?
Can you
I
put it on an
appreciate
email? Email, maybe?
I'll just put it in an email.
Right?
That'd be, good, yeah. How many pages is that?
432.
Okay.
It's a book. You know, lots of it is not really relevant to our charts, but it's just the development of art and as it related to the tent. Because this was basically the PowerPoint of the day. What's that, William?
You gonna send me one?
Yeah, I'm going to send everybody one.
I'm just gonna broadcast it.
Just send everyone one. Yeah, I'll put it on WhatsApp as well.
There you go.
Okay. So in organizing this information, right, for ourselves, you know, we know that Judges chapter 1, it's going to obviously start on 1:1. So the whole book of Judges, even though this part here, Judges 1:1, doesn't have a judge, right? It's still part of that structure, right? And so we dealt with Judges chapter 1, and it's going to sort of reiterate some of Joshua, and then go into the whole things of failing to complete the conquest, right? So the reason why we end up with the angel of the Lord coming down to Gilgal, right? But then it's going to deal with the death of Joshua afterwards. So that was kind of confusing, but it's just bringing us back to the past. And then it's going to deal with these judges. And when it says the Lord raised up judges, it's going to start in 2016, right? And so we address that. So, I mean, that's one section that I need to address. How come we do this with judges in the first place? But it has to do with this repeat of history. And then, so then we deal with all the individual judges. And I don't think that we could go through that even in this study that I'm going to do at the camp meeting. I definitely can't go through all of the detail that we have addressed. I mean, I can have
That's a lot.
I can have the lines there and people can look at them, but they just need the general idea that we can zoom into these lines. So we got Othniel, Ehud, and Shamgar, but you know, Ehud has his own line, and then when we go to, you know, Shamgar has his own line. Where's Ehud's line? I don't know what happened to Ehud. Oh, there he is, right there. So he has a line, right? You're going to see, so Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, each has their own line. And when we started doing this, we began to recognize these symbols. One of the things that we've utilized more in the study of Judges than we had in the past was the use of the Hebrew numbers, right? So for instance, here in Shamgar, this is going to be addressing these presentations dealing with basically the time that's going to lead us to October 13th, 2018. And we probably don't remember this one too much because we didn't spend a lot of time on it because it's just a few verses. But we could see that the word slew, for instance, which is the Hebrew 5221, represents December 25th, right, as a symbol. And then we're going to put this at Noel in June 22nd, 2014. That's going to be the empowerment of this message that arrives on October 5th, 777 days before the Mayan calendar date. right? So these things become, one of the problems, here's a problem that we have with what we found. A lot of this stuff is really connected with me. This is a problem we had with FFA because there's these personal prejudices against me, right? So when we had the July 18, 2020 proclamation, as I mentioned, I'm not doing any presentations. Even when I go there on November, for November 9th for that weekend, I mean, they just wanted me to do the superintendent remarks. They had no interest in having me do any presentations about July 18th or about any of the things that we had found. Now, Stephen and Odilio were doing those presentations, but, and it's not anything against Stephen or Odilio, because what they were doing was good, but there was lots that they were missing because we needed as a movement to understand how these things unfolded. And Odilio and Stephen didn't really know that because they weren't there. They didn't know how.
Can that be interpreted as the work of the enemies?
Well, yeah.
You know, because for me, personality issues, yeah, they can tend to get in the way, but I try to look past those things no matter what, because I'm more interested in truth than, who's presenting it.
Yeah, I know. And I've had that situation where somebody, there's situations where somebody's been presenting and I have personal feelings about that person. And I'm able to set those aside because I recognize them. But often people don't recognize their own feelings. And I don't know if, I'm not ready to just blame people for that and say, well, they got these problems, they should be able to recognize their own feelings. I think I'm very blessed in that area, being an artist, being a poet, a songwriter, and somebody who was raised the way that I was, where my mom helped me as a child understand what I was feeling and why I was acting a certain way. So I understand a lot about people's emotions, and especially my own emotions. I know if I'm feeling something, I'm able to quickly recognize that I'm feeling it. But some people have feelings that are so deep rooted that these prejudices have nothing to do with me, right? They have to do with things in their own lives that are unresolved, anger against other people. And only the gospel can change that, right? And so, a big part of our message is obviously presenting the gospel. But when I look at these lines and I look how intertwined I am with them, that events in my life, presentations that I've done, things that I studied and dug up from the scriptures, through painstaking effort, that are now a part of this movement. For some people, they just don't like it. And like there's things that I found out, I remember about the 2520, and Tabo was doing, we were doing some presentations on the 2520 at somebody's house, and he wanted to make sure that I presented that the 70 years of Daniel's captivity are connected with the 490 years of, from Saul to the captivity of Daniel. And little did he know I was the one who actually dug that up, right? That was a contribution that I had that wasn't well understood. Nobody had understood the chronology to put that together and to understand Leviticus 26 in that way. Tabo didn't particularly like me, and maybe if he had known that I was the one who had dug that up, he might have not been so interested in me presenting that. But the point is that when you're tied to something, people can feel, okay, well, this person is promoting themselves because their idea that they came up with is now being presented, and and they must want human praise or something like that. Right. So, and that's not always the case. Not everybody is interested in the praise of others. Right. But if we're interested in the praise of others, we might think that other people are interested in the praise of others, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
And so the way that I look at it is when I have feelings about a person, I need to take a long, deep look at myself and say, why do I feel that? Why am I attributing a motive to another person when I have no idea what their motives are in what they're saying or what they're doing? And why am I critical or judgmental? Why do they make me feel this way? They don't make me feel that way. I feel that way because there's something in me that feels that way. Has nothing to do with them. Right? They might, trigger that feeling, but that's not their fault. Right? It's something about my experience that's making me react that way to what they're saying or what they're doing. And so this is a huge barrier that we face because, as I said, we're all damaged, right? People have been hurt. And when somebody says something or does something that reminds them of someone else who has hurt them, it's going to affect their relationship with you. It's going to affect their ability to even hear what you're saying. And the worst thing that people can do is often people will claim that they're not hurt when it's pretty obvious that they are hurt, that they're acting out of hurt, out of emotion. So this is something that we have to pray about, and we have to figure out what we can do. Like, obviously we can't change another person's heart, but what can we do to reach people? And this is the thing I struggle with all the time. And anytime I know that somebody doesn't like me or have a conflict with someone, whether it's family members or church members or whatever, I try to figure out what is it that I'm doing that's contributing. But sometimes, what's that?
The church used to have personal testimony time,
Yeah.
and that would reveal some things about a person.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really like personal testimony time, but that's just me personally. I rather talk to people. So I like to spend time talking to people as an individual, one-on-one, and just kind of hear their stories about their life and so forth. That can help me understand them a little bit.
I know Inspiration talks about that, having personal testimonies.
Oh, I know. I'm not saying that personal testimonies aren't good. I'm just saying that I think they are important. People should be praising God. I think sometimes, though, they can be done in a wrong way. So
Yeah.
my problem with personal testimonies is simply this. It's always the same people who give the testimonies, and they always give the same testimonies. Right?
Yeah, it's supposed to have different people all the time do it.
Yeah. So the ones that should be giving testimonies aren't going to say what's going on in their life or in their hearts or whatever, right? So that's my problem with it. But I think they're a good idea, especially in small groups. In a big church, I don't know how functional they are.
Yeah, probably small groups, I would say too.
That's why I like small study groups, like 12, 15 people. Like the upper room studies we used to have. But yeah, so I still don't know exactly, what we can do. We're going to go through each of these lines again, right? So we're going to go through them and just try to, and my suggestion is what we should do the next few days is we're going to draw them out. Everyone's going to have a pen and a paper or something and draw out these lines. And we try to do this together. So we try to say, okay, what is the line of Othniel? You know, and of course I can help people because I'll have the lines here and we can go through them. And you know, Shamgar and Ehud, and just deal with each of these lines and what the symbols are, so we can go through there and understand the symbols. And that should help us a little bit to sort through, you know, could we present these more simply? So that would be my suggestion. How does that sound to people generally? Any opposed?
It's good to me.
Okay, so that's what we're going to try to do over the next few days. So we're
The
gonna,
only issue that I have with this at all, with the chart, is I've had to oftentimes go back. I see the date, but I have to go back and figure out how we came to that.
right. So
Um,
one of the things that we should do, so we have these charts and these diagrams. A lot of the dates I know quite well.
Right, that's the problem, because
Right.
that there was a date I chased for a couple of hours in researching, because it didn't have what it was exactly in there. So we need to kind of be able to thoughtful of that, you know, like how we came to that conclusion, not necessarily how we came to the conclusion, but what were the roots of that one. Like one of the ones was a presentation done on February 22nd or 2nd, one of the two.
Well,
And it was on a line, and I sat there and I stared at it for a long time going, well, what was that?
Yeah.
And I had to go back through all of my, well, actually I went through the files you sent me on your presentations, and I'd searched out that date, and finally it came up what it was. And so that triggered me now. So I'm just saying that some of the dates need to be some sort of small explanation to
yeah.
it.
So what we should do with each of the lines is we should draw them out and also have the explanations written out. And the verses.
Yeah, that would be very good.
Yeah. Okay.
That's the only real trouble I see with that. And like giving them to people and having them look at it and they're going like, well, what the?
Yeah, no, I know. So maybe what we're gonna, this will help me sort of organize my book and doing that. We can go through these dates. So we can just, you know, and even where we get them from, how we know this and so forth. And how they're connected.
Right, readily accessible to our, you know,
Okay.
to our pointing of our fingers.
Okay, so this might take us a little bit of a while to do, but it'd be a good plan. Okay, let's close with prayer. Dear Father in heaven, thank you for the study this morning and for your help. We pray for people in this movement. We know, Lord, that we are hurting individuals, that we live in this world of sin and suffering. We've all had injustices done to us. And we also have guilt for things that we have done in hurting others, things that we wish to avoid in our own lives, things that we don't want to address. But we ask, Lord, that through your Spirit, you can work upon our hearts, and that the truths that you have showed to us will give us the confidence to continue moving closer to you. Thank you for hearing our prayer. Bring us together again, we pray and ask in Jesus' name. Amen.